people differ greatly in all aspects of what is casually known as intelligence. The differences are apparent not only in school, from kindergarten to college, but also in the most ordinary circumstances, in the words people use and comprehend, in the differing abilities to read map or follow directions, or in their capacities for remembering telephone numbers or figuring change. The variations in these specific skills are so common that they are often taken for granted. Yet what makes people so different? It would be reasonable to think that the environment is the source of differences in cognitive skills, that we are what we learn. It is clear, for example, that human beings are not born with a full vocabulary. They have to learn words. Hence, learning must be the mechanism by which differences in vocabulary arise among individuals. And differences in experience, say, in the extent to which parents model and encourage vocabulary skills or in the quality of language training provided by schools, must be responsible for individual differences in learning. Earlier in this century, psychology was in fact dominated by environmental explanations for variance in cognitive abilities. More recently, however, most psychologists have begun to embrace a more balanced view, one in which nature and nurture interact in cognitive development. A day would come, Percy Shelley predicted in 1813, when the monopolizing eater of animal flesh would no longer destroy his constitution by eating an acre at a meal. He explained, the quantity of nutritious vegetable matter consumed in fattening the carcass of an ox would afford 10 times the sustenance if gathered immediately from the bosom of the earth. 200 years later, mainstream agronomists and dietitians have caught up with the poet. A growing scientific consensus agrees that feeding cereals and beans to animals is an inefficient and extravagant way to produce human food, that there is a limited amount of grazing land, that the world will be hard-pressed to supply a predicted population of 9 billion people with a diet as rich in meat as the industrialized world currently enjoys, and that it's not a very healthy diet anyway. On top of this, livestock contribute significantly towards global warming, generating 14.5% of all man-made greenhouse gas emissions, according to one much-quoted estimate from the United Nations. Now that the problem has been identified, the challenge is to persuade people in wealthy countries to eat less meat. That might seem a tall order, but governments have successfully persuaded people to quit smoking through a combination of public information, regulation and taxation. An international team of scientists is set to go to Arctic to investigate the Greenland shark longevity mystery. The shark is known to be the longest living vertebrate animal on the planet Earth. One of the members is Dr. Holly Shields, a physiologist and senior lecturer in the Faculty of Life Sciences at the University of Manchester. She will be the only British scientist in the team to study Greenland shark, which is believed to be the vertebrate animals and mammals with the longest living. The shark is reported to have lived for more than 200 years, and possibly close to or more than 400 years. The shark is both hunter and a scavenger, that feed on seals and other animals including polar bears and whales. It is also known as one of the largest sharks, reaching to 5.5 meters (18 feet), very close to the size of a great white. The research team is commissioned by the Greenland government and will conduct the research on board the multi-purpose research vessel Sanna, operated by the Greenland Institute of Natural Resources. The Greenland shark is estimated to be able to live for 400 years according to Science magazine. Professor Shields expects to gather sufficient data of Greenland shark, a top predator in the Arctic Sea. Is the purpose of history to promote a strong national identity and support national myths? Certainly, it has been used in this way for centuries, and this is often reflected in the history curriculum. We can all remember history at school as being a matter of learning lots of facts and dates, and long lists of kings and queens, a grand narrative of how we got from a not-so-civilized past to the great nation we are today. Putting aside the fact that national identity is a complex and divisive question, especially in countries like the UK, which is comprised of several nationalities, this approach to history emphasizes a broad understanding, rather than a detailed understanding. Yet history is, or should be, a critical, skeptical discipline. Some historians see their work as disproving myths, demolishing orthodoxies, and exposing politically motivated narratives which claim to be objective. What students need to develop are more critical and analytical skills, in other words, to think for themselves. They can do this by studying certain historical problems in depth. This involves being critical of the narratives presented by historians and skeptical of the myths preserved in the national memory.
As economic troubles stops flare up around the globe, the earning estimates of American firms who do business abroad begin to flatten. Without these international consumers to buy their products, there are fewer sales, which means that inventories pile up. When there is more supply than demand, prices go down. Lower prices would normally cause demand to pick up, but in an uncertain economy people tend to postpone purchases. We see this tendency in the American economy with computer products where consumers believe that the prices will go down if they wait another 6 months, so they decide to hold off. This tendency causes further gluts in the market, which eventually leads manufacturers to slow production. They lay off workers, causing domestic consumption to fall further since there is less money to buy goods. These effects ripples throughout the economy and create a deflationary spiral that can lead to a recession or even a depression. With a good system of crop rotation, and especially with the addition of any sort of fertilizer you may be able to come up with, it's possible to grow crops on a plot of land for upwards of 2-3 years at a time with good results. Ultimately, though, you must let the land rest if you hope to continue farming there in the long run. Allowing a plot of land to rest for a period of time is known as letting the field go fallow, and there are several reasons for this. Allowing a field or plot to lie fallow means that you don't grow anything new on it, don't harvest anything and don't graze any animals on the land for at least a year. Sometimes a field will lay fallow for 2, 3 or even 4 years, but the traditional standard on many farms was to let a field lie fallow once every 2-3 years. This fallow period allows the land to replenish many of its nutrients. The root networks of various grasses or ground covers, like clover, have a chance to expand and grow, which further strengthens the soil and protects it from erosion. During the fallow period, there are many beneficial flora and microfauna, including cyanobacteria, which live in the soil. These microorganisms continue to be active at the root level, steadily improving the quality of the soil so that when you come back in a year or 2, you can begin planting food or cash crops anew.
The first inhabitants in Australia were the ancestors of the present Indigenous people. Whether these first migrations involved one or several successive waves and distinct peoples is still subject to academic debate, as is its timing. The minimum widely accepted time frame places presence of humans in Australia at 40,000 to 43,000 years before present, while the upper range supported by others is 60,000 to 70,000 years BP. In any event, this migration was achieved during the closing stages of the Pleistocene epoch, when sea levels were typically much lower than they are today. Repeated episodes of extended glaciation resulted in decreases of sea levels by some 100,150 meters. The continental coastline therefore extended much further out into the Timor Sea than it does today, and Australia and New Guinea formed a single landmass, known as Sahel, connected by an extensive land bridge across the Arafura Sea, Gulf of Carpentry and Torres Strait. The ancestral Australian Aboriginal peoples were thus long established and continued to develop, diversify and settle through much of the continent. As the sea levels again rose at the terminus of the most recent glacial period some 10,000 years ago, the Australian continent once more became a separated landmass. However, the newly formed 150 kilometers wide Torres Strait with its chain of islands still alive.
It's very easy to forget about what's in the ground beneath our feet and why it's so important to protect it. 1 tablespoon of soil contains more organisms than there are people on Earth. Billions of bacteria, fungi and other microorganisms combine with minerals, water, air and organic matter to create a living system that supports plants and, in turn, all life. Healthy soil can store as much as 3,750 tons of water per hectare, reducing the risk of flooding, and the International Panel on Climate Change (IPCC) has said that 89% of all agricultural emissions could be mitigated if we improved the health of our soil. Good soil management also increases disease resistance in livestock and ultimately drives profits for farmers, yet soil and its impact on the health of our animals has, over recent decades, been one of the most neglected links in UK agriculture. Over the last 50 years, agriculture has become increasingly dependent on chemical fertilizers, with applications today around 10 times higher than in the 1950s. Farmers often think the chemical fertilizer NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium provides all the nutrition a plant requires, but it also has a detrimental effect on the long-term health of the land. Research suggests there are fewer than 100 harvests left in many of the world's soils. His product life cycle has 4 very clearly defined stages, each with its characteristics that mean different things for businesses that are trying to manage the life cycle of their particular products. Introduction stage. This stage of the cycle could be the most expensive for a company launching a new product. The size of the market for the product is small, which means sales are low, although they will be increasing. On the other hand, the cost of things like research and development, consumer testing, and the marketing needed to launch the product can be very high, especially if it's a competitive sector. Growth stage. The growth stage is typically characterized by strong growth in sales and profits, and because the company can start to benefit from economies of scale in production, the profit margins, as well as the overall amount of profit, will increase. This makes it possible for businesses to invest more money in promotional activity to maximize the potential of this growth stage. Maturity stage. During the maturity stage, the product is established and the aim for the manufacturer is nowadays onto market share they have built up. This is probably the most competitive time for most products, and businesses need to invest wisely in any marketing they undertake.